Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Tim Porter. Tim is a managing director at Madrona Venture Group, which he joined in 2006. Prior to Madrona, Tim was a key member of Microsoft's corporate development group. Since joining Madrona, Tim focuses on investing in B2B software companies in the Pacific Northwest. Madrona manages $1.7 billion and has had 68 exits. Some of the notable companies include Redfin, Smartsheet, and Apptio. Tim's companies are Heptio, Highspot, Algorithmia, and Lattice Data, as well as some others, right? We're going to talk about
many of them.
One of the things that I love most about Tim, I've known his wife, Jenny, for a long time, is that he is an amazing husband, father, and friend. And just as a secret, I did speak with Jenny before this, but welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having
you
me,
so much.
Shauna. It's fun to be here.
You. I'm psyched. So I don't know if you've listened to the podcast before, but we always start with rapid fire. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let me just get to my rapid fire. Hold, please.
By the way, while you're going to rapid fire, not only did my wife, Jenny, help me get on this podcast, because you've known her forever, she is also the fundamental reason that I got the job at Madrona, too. So
because of Greg Gottesman. I did read that. Is that right?
Among other things.
Among other things?
That's right.
Well, sometimes it's the woman, right? Let's be honest.
Usually, often the spouse.
Yes. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
I know that you're a fit guy, so what's your favorite type of workout?
Basketball.
Okay. What position?
Shooting guard.
Nice. Okay. Are you a planner or are you spontaneous?
Planner.
What's the quality that you most often look for in an entrepreneur before investing?
Maniacal customer focus.
I love that. Okay. I also know that you love hip hop, which is my jam. So Biggie or Tupac?
Biggie.
Me too. Yay. What one word describes you as an investor?
Helpful.
And what is a favorite business book?
Last year, my favorite one that I read was called Essentialism.
Oh yeah, I've heard that that's amazing.
Basically, it's beyond business. It's anything in life, how to focus on what's important and not get pulled into constantly what's urgent or what's sort of nagging you. I got a lot out of it. Easy, short read, very very good for anyone.
That's been recommended so many times. Water or mountains?
Mountains.
Yeah.
Although I love both. I love the outdoors.
Are you a skier or a snowboarder?
Snowboarder. And I'm actually just learning to ski after having snowboarded for the last 20 years.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I grew up in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I always say lots of snow, no hills. And so I didn't do either. And when I moved to Seattle in my early 20s, everyone that skied had skied all their life and people were learning to snowboard. So I learned to snowboard and have done that. But now I'm learning to ski because I want to keep doing it till I'm in my 70s. And I'm already envisioning the getting up and down off my butt.
Yeah.
Buckling into the snowboard
I think
bindings.
Skiing might be easier. I've never tried snowboarding because I'm scared of falling. And I'm also most scared of getting off the chairlift, to be totally honest. When I see that, I'm like, how are these people doing that?
Yeah.
That's hard, right?
It's tricky.
It looks really, really hard. Okay, so you already mentioned this, that you grew up in Wisconsin. One of my colleagues who actually helped me prepare for this podcast is from Wisconsin, and she was super excited that she learned that about you.
She's super nice, isn't she?
Yeah, I was about to say that several people that I'm friends with are from the Midwest, and I feel like I'm very drawn to, well, obviously nice people. But is that a true thing, or do people just say that?
Not to overgeneralize, but good people in Wisconsin.
Just good people.
No, I think it's you can't paint with too broad a brush, but I think people are very friendly.
Yeah. And are your parents
very open.
from there?
Yep, parents are there. 2 sisters, one's still there, one's in L.A.
Where are you in the birth order?
Oldest.
Are you the oldest?
Yep. I have one sister who's 2.5 years younger. She works at Disney in HR with Imagineering, which I always think is cool.
Oh, really?
And one sister is 13 years younger, and she works at Grainger in their e-com group.
And she lives where?
She works in north side of Chicago, lives in southeastern Wisconsin. I grew up, the town I grew up in, Racine. It's kind of between Milwaukee and Chicago.
And do you guys have family traditions that you remember as a kid?
Our one vacation spot was to go up north.
Yeah.
To my grandma and grandpa's cabin on a lake, and
lakes are a big deal there.
That was our vacation spot. So
Yeah.
lots of good memories doing that.
Nice. In preparing, I don't think I even realized that you're. So I knew that you're high achieving in your career, but I guess the pedigree part is helpful to learn about. MIT, right?
I was the Wisconsin quota or something, but
and so how does that? Did you go to private school or public school?
I went to private school. My mom taught there. My parents went to high school at this high school.
That's so cute.
Racine Lutheran, and it was very small. Our graduating class was only 44 kids. The school had just over 200. We had a small class, and
did you like it? Like school with 44 kids?
Yeah, I liked it. The other high schools in Racine is like 100,000 people. There were 3 public high schools with 2,000 kids or whatever, and this one just happened to be smaller. But had a great group of friends, had a lot of fun.
So would they say kind of in 8th grade, like, oh, for sure, Tim's like the friend that's going to end up at a top school?
Not necessarily. The quick story on it is that I had applied to Big Ten schools, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Purdue, and my one aunt and uncle, my Aunt Jan, called me up and said, hey, you should try to take a flyer on, you've gotten good grades, you should try to take a flyer. Why don't you apply to Harvard or somewhere like that? We'll pay for the application. And I said, well, I really want to do engineering. If I was going to do something like that, maybe I would try MIT. And they're like, well, just do it. So I tried, and surprisingly, I got in.
And did you like it? Would you change it?
I did like it. Met some of the best friends in my life. It's I got to play basketball there, which is an oxymoron.
I know. Well, in my mind, when you're saying like Purdue and these other schools, I'm picturing these big kind of college sports.
Very different.
Very different. Yeah.
MIT's participation oriented.
Yes.
But yeah, so that was fun. I learned a ton. Learned how to work hard. Got exposed to a lot of smart folks, and
what were you
fantastic.
into when you were a kid? You started to say science and obviously basketball.
Mm-hmm.
You're a hooper scientist.
I was into sports. I was into fishing. I was really like that with my family, and just normal stuff. I was not like some early coder.
Yeah. I'm actually just coming right off of watching the Bill Gates special on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it, but I'm in that headspace right now of like the brainchild that's, the prodigy in 8th grade.
Nope, that definitely not even close. No one is like Bill Gates, but definitely not. At MIT, I had a bunch of friends, I started my first company, or
right.
I've been learning.
That's what I pictured.
I was none of those things.
So did you feel like you were kind of not undeserving, but did you feel like less than when you went there, or you were like fine?
Yeah, and I think always have the outlook of, have to work harder than everybody else and try to take that mindset into things is a good one. I think that served me well. I remember the first, so this is funny. So I got there in 1992. The first coding class I took was second semester. So first semester was, all the requirements were calculus, physics, chemistry. And then, so I took this first coding class. It was Introduction to C. It's called 100. It's kind of a famous class. And the very first question on the first problem set was email your TA. And I hadn't set up an email account yet. So it was a whole semester at MIT and hadn't sent an email. So it just, that's how much times have changed.
Yeah.
And
then, big time.
Yeah. Getting to that, I remember it took me like 40 hours to build the first program. And my friends who'd grown up finished in 30 minutes or whatever. So,
yes. You're looking around like I better. Did you think that you wanted to pursue a career in engineering?
Yep. I actually majored in mechanical, which I like because it was sort of the most multidisciplinary.
And econ too, right?
Econ minor. And I was interested in tech companies for sure and wanted to do engineering. I didn't know exactly what. I did this internship program where you got to work each summer for credit and money. And then it was a 5-year master's bachelor's, and you matched into one of a set of companies. You interviewed at a bunch of them, but these were all pretty traditional mechanical engineering companies like Ford and Michelin. And I matched at Weyerhaeuser, And I first time I ever came to Washington was to intern for Weyerhaeuser in 1994.
And where
Kind of never left.
I love that. Well, especially because you said you love the great outdoors.
Yeah.
This is like where to be if you're not going to be in Wisconsin. And so you said that you did these kind of rotating internships. So different companies every summer, or they were Weyerhaeuser every summer?
I worked for Weyerhaeuser 3 summers, and the third summer was from June till Christmas or till New Year's. And I got about halfway into it and got pretty bored. No, I love Weyerhaeuser, great company. But it was 96, and I had 2 other friends from MIT who had joined a startup in Seattle called Teledesic. And they're like, you got to join. This thing's going to be unbelievable. They're building satellites. Bill Gates, Craig McCaw are the investors. And so I called up my thesis advisor. I said, I'm not done with everything, but can I hand it in and be done with my bachelor's part and put the rest of the master's degree on hold? And he said, sure. And so much to my mom's chagrin, I said, I'm dropping out of grad school and joined Teledesic in 1996.
That's amazing. And so the timing of this, you said you dropped out of grad school, and then I know you went to Stanford Business School. So where did that fit in?
Yep. So I worked for Teledesic for 4.5 years. And then when the telecom internet bubble, deflating, I applied to business school and went in 2001.
Nice.
Yep. So I worked for almost 5 years and then went back to business school, which was great because I learned a lot at Teledesic over those years.
And what happened with Teledesic?
Well, it never launched a satellite, but we never ran out of money. So it just decided weren't going to be able to get it financed, given it was 2001. And the capital that was left over in the company actually became a local firm called Rally Capital that Dennis Weibling has ran for a lot of years, invested in local technology companies and other things like real estate. So it basically folded up. It basically decided we weren't out of money, but we weren't going to be able to raise enough more to launch all these satellites.
So you went to Stanford Business School. Did you apply other places, or that's where you had your eye on?
It was great. It felt very fortunate. It was an amazing place. So the first time I applied was to start in 2000, and I got waitlisted at Stanford. I got into HBS. I sent in my deposit to go to HBS, and then a bunch of things happened, and work kind of heated back up. And they're like, "Please stay. We'll write you a good recommendation for next year." And so then I did. So I reapplied the next year, and then I got in off the wait list. But the 100,000% best part of that whole story was that Jenny and I had just started dating when I was going to leave for Boston, and I got to stay in Seattle for another whole year.
Yeah.
And then
nurture that.
We ended up getting married. Yeah.
Yes. So I was going to ask you on the podcast how you met her, but I ended up asking her because I talked to her right before.
It was hilarious. So I worked with Alan. He was at Teledesic, was an attorney at Teledesic. And he's like, yeah, I've got this friend. You should totally meet her, and let's all go out to dinner. And so we set up this double date. And then day of, Alan was like, oh, you know what? Something came up tonight. You guys just go ahead. So
that was his whole move?
Yeah, it was kind of funny. Yeah, so it worked out. So we went to Cyclops when it was on First Avenue in Belltown, first date.
How did they describe her, and how did they describe you? Have you ever asked her?
That's a good question. I just remember you'll like each other. You'll think each other are fun.
Yeah.
We like both of you. You should meet.
That's so, good. They've got one. I don't know if they've got more under their belt. That's a skill right there.
Forever in their debt. Still great friends.
So you got another year here, and then you went to business school. For those listening that are considering what to do, should I go to business school? Is it necessary? Is it not? Is that something you kind of across the board recommend?
Business school is awesome, and I've almost never talked to someone who said, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Right.
You can get a ton out of it, whether it's spending a couple years to think about what you want to do next. You can learn a lot of things in school. You can meet a big network.
Yeah. A lot of people talk about the network part of it.
And the network is huge. I think if you were only going to build a network, I wouldn't pay that much money. I think you actually have to want to learn something in school and to explore some different career opportunities or have some new doors open. But on the other hand, I don't think an MBA is necessary for anything. And so if you are very clear on what you want to do, if your goal is to go be a corporate vice president at company X, your fastest path is to stay at company X and do a kick-ass job and don't go spend 2 years doing business school. So it's not usually the most direct path if you know exactly what your goal is. But if you are trying to create option value for yourself and you want to explore some different things and you're not quite sure, it's a great investment.
Yeah.
For me, I'm really glad that I did it.
Yeah. And do you think that it was something that helped you in your career? Like, did that link to anything for you that you can measure that's like, oh, that's what they said stood out on my resume?
Not sure. I mean, it's, I think folks rely on schools, rightly or wrongly, as signaling. So I think that's great. I think more substantively, spending 2 years going through hundreds of these cases is good training to see lots of different businesses now.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, I learned skill X in class Y and I used that this week. It's the aggregate benefit of all this critical thinking.
Yes.
And definitely all the people that I met have been super valuable.
Yeah.
As VCs, we rely on, our networks to not just get referred into, interesting companies or entrepreneurs or founders, but we're always trying to find people who know more about a space than we do, which is usually not hard to find. And talent.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
And talent for sure.
Yeah.
So that's so it's been really helpful.
Yeah. And so tell me about your experience at Microsoft, because several of the guests that I've had on the podcast, maybe because we're in Seattle, have had a stint at Microsoft. How would you describe that experience and their culture?
I loved it. It was great. I was only there 3 years. I thought I was going to be there longer. I worked in corp dev, so M&A and investments. 03 to 06 was mostly M&A. And it was a fortunate time because 01, 02, kind of beginning 03, the economy was down. Microsoft did very few acquisitions and investments. And when I got there, serendipitously, things started to really pick up a lot. And so the corp dev team had been fairly big and then had gotten smaller just because there wasn't as much going on. And then when we were smaller and I was there, a bunch of deals started happening. So I think
what kind of deals were they?
So I worked predominantly with server and tools, which now Microsoft calls Cloud and Enterprise. And, it's SQL Server and Windows Server and their management servers, dev tools. So all the same things that I still, have been investing in for the last 13 years, all the same categories. And they were making lots of acquisitions. And so,
so what is the role of somebody that's in corp dev? You're doing kind of analysis?
Basically to quarterback the deal. And so point on coming up with valuation and negotiating strategy, actually negotiating the deal, and then quarterbacking the due diligence and the overall deal process. The deal sponsor is always the business group. And whoever's the GM or the vice president who's in charge of product X or business Y, which I also love because I got to learn and work with a lot of those folks. In fact, two people that I worked on acquisitions for when I was there, Soma Sagar and Ted Cummert, are both at Madrona now. And
did you bring them there?
It was a group effort, for sure. The reconnection with Soma was actually that he was an angel investor in a company I was on the board of called Boutique. And the founder and CEO, co-founder and CEO, Boutique, Forrest Key, had said, hey, you really need to reconnect with Soma. And I said, yeah, I worked a little bit with him. I'm not sure he'd remember me. Anyway, and that was the reconnection point. And then, built a conversation with a number of other people at Madrona. And it's been awesome. He and Ted, actually Terry Meyerson at Madrona now as well, also got to work on some acquisitions for. So it was an amazing group of people, learned a ton, got exposure broadly across the enterprise software world.
Yeah. And how would you describe the culture there?
It's Microsoft. There were and are a lot of really smart people that are trying to think big. It takes a lot to move the needle at Microsoft, as we'd say, and you have to build, business that can only be 100 million is not even material in most cases. And so I think, working to get things done with smart technical people, and to think about how you build big scale businesses, and how you build platforms, and how you think about ecosystems. I know I'm getting away from culture. And I was there 3 years, so I can't say I got everything. I think the biggest change, maybe it gets at this question, like when I came to Madrona and, going from what did Microsoft have then, 50,000 people here, to, 15 people was just...
Was Madrona 15 when you joined?
Something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit bigger than that. But, it was so much faster to get decisions done.
Yeah.
So that was the frustrating part about Microsoft is, especially when it was something like M&A, like you couldn't make a big decision without having a 20 person, plus meeting usually. And it took a long time to get those set up and preparing for them. And in Madrona, it felt like you could walk down the hall, get together with one or two other people and make decisions a lot more quickly. So that was refreshing. A wonderful part about Microsoft is you were always working on a global scale and, all over the world, but it was hard to be in touch with what was happening here locally. And Madrona had been focused on Seattle, so that's been awesome to really focus on the local ecosystem, Pacific Northwest. And so, I viewed it at Microsoft like dealing with the friction of all those people and slow decision processes. Like you just needed to embrace that and figure out how to, still get things done. Without getting sort of lost in the politics of it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I would probably not do very well in that type of environment because I don't have patience for it.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
You need to have some patience.
Yeah, you got to have some patience.
Yeah.
So speaking of Madrona, though, I know that you are like office mates with Scott.
Yes,
I love that. How many years is that?
As Jenny says, my work husband.
He's your work husband.
It's pretty funny. So Madrona's always had the bullpen, and the bullpen is usually the associate team, 2 or 3 or 4 folks. And so when I started and I was in the bullpen with Suja Vaidyanathan, and then Scott started a few months later, maybe it was 6 months, maybe a little bit less than that. And so the 3 of us were in the bullpen. And as things changed and the team evolved and we moved offices and everything, he and I always just kept officing together.
Yeah.
And we still have. And he works on a lot of more consumer things and I work on a lot of more enterprise things. And we have fun keeping track on what's going on and have
both are cool. What would you say to a entrepreneur who's trying to catch your attention? What do they need to do to prepare to present and pitch to Madrona?
Yeah, great question. I think it is always best if we haven't sort of reached out and tried to tap on your shoulder and say, hey, can you tell us about what you're doing and how to help, to try to find some warm referral. It's pretty easy to probably find a mutual connection in Seattle with somebody, at Madrona who can say like, hey, I know Beth and she's great at X, Y, and Z and you should really meet her. But on the other hand, it's a little bit of a myth around like, oh, you can't get a meeting with a VC. My email's on our website.
Yeah.
And I respond. I mean, if it's total...
do you meet with everyone? Because it's similar to like recruiting. I mean, 10 today that are like,
you can't meet with everyone.
Right. Can I pick your brain? That's hard.
Just don't have all the time in the day. And also try to be respectful of the entrepreneur's time. If it's just not a fit, I try to tell you that up front. But if it's not a fit for something I know about, but Scott or Elisa or Dan or does know more about, then try to socialize internally. And Madrona has, our bias is like, we would like to meet. Our bias is to meet with kind of anyone in our purview, early stage tech, predominantly Pacific Northwest, because you just never know. It may be, if not this meeting, down the road.
Right, or build a relationship.
A relationship.
For sure.
Hopefully be helpful, in that meeting, give a piece of advice or be able to make an intro. So the bias is to meet. We can't meet with everyone. And we get some kind of off the wall things that come in sometimes. And if it doesn't seem, quote, credible, then we don't necessarily respond. But otherwise, I always try to respond. And so the best way to get a meeting is through a warm referral. But if you don't have one, then, just send the note.
But beyond the meeting, the
thing that gets my attention, and we invest really early. And so nothing's too early.
Only early, like seed?
So if we do seed, and Series A is kind of our historic sweet spot. Each fund sort of breaks down about a quarter of the initial investments in our companies are seed, and we just define that as an initial check of less than $1 million. Like 60% are what classically has been called Series A. Now, a lot of Series A's are called Series Seeds, but it's sort of, $2 to $5 million initial investments from Madrona. So that's always been our bread and butter. And then that last 15 or 20% of investments in each fund, call it 3 to 5 investments, will be Series B and C. And now we have another fund that we call Acceleration Fund that we're going to be able to do a few more of those B and C, sort of, let's say 5 million and up, types. But the bread and butter is, sort of that first institutional round. And the things that really gets my attention is people who have identified, back to this, you asked me in the rapid fire, the maniacal customer focus is, even if you're brand new and you don't have a product in market yet and don't have revenue, is that you've identified a customer pain point and that you've validated it through sort of thorough vetting, and that can be a lot of different ways. Maybe you were the customer before. You're, you run your business, Sean, and you're like, why doesn't anyone, have this?
Right.
And so that's a good way. Or you identified it somehow and you went and talked to 25, 50, 75. You did a set of things to validate this pain point, and you can build a solution to address it. I mean, that's the fundamental equation of a business, right? If you can answer those things, you've got a business. And then we as venture fund have to sit there and say, okay, how big is it? How many of those customers are? But I love just starting with that. You identified a pain point that you really understand, and you can build a solution to fix it.
And so, I mean, you've got all these other investors sitting next to you, and just like a recruiter, you can get to the end different ways, different types of styles. Some might be more, in your industry, might be more investing in people versus ideas.
Yep.
Are you both, or which one if you had to choose? Is it the idea or the people? Always the people?
For sure. And there's sort of this classic, it's people, it's market, and then kind of
so it's the size of the market.
Product or technology. Those are sort of the three legs of the stool for any, when we sit around and try to evaluate and decide are we going to invest or not, we literally talk about those categories. There's related things like, is it the right market timing and who's the competition? But fundamentally, it's people, market, and product.
So somebody's an entrepreneur at Amazon right now, and they're thinking they've got this amazing idea and they have a co-founder and they've come up with it. When they're looking at these three areas, what should they do to kind of ask themselves if they are ready or are a fit?
I think it goes back to this point about, have you identified, prospective customers who said they would, pay for your service? And
before they come to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's less about coming to us and more before you sink your life into pursuing this thing,
your
right?
Time
it's
sort of you get crazy.
It's one thing to come and chat with us for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. It's another thing to sink all the time into it. Yeah. But it's about the team, right? Yeah. Because at the beginning, one of our partners, Matt, has said this a lot. The best you can hope for is that you're directionally correct because you're specifically wrong. And
I like that.
And so it's all about iterating, and against some vision that you have.
And what's the biggest misconception about what a day in the life is as a VC?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is a big misconception, but mostly what we do and what I do is try to help and work with our portfolio companies. And so I think there could be a misconception that you're sort of sitting back and saying, I'm going to make these bets and I'm going to put, some chips on this and some chips on that. And yes, if you think about this, you might spend, anywhere between 2 weeks and 6 months doing diligence. Sometimes it can take a little longer. And then we spend 8 to 10 years, with these companies.
And what is the structure of Madrona versus other structures of VCs?
I think we're probably pretty typical. And so we have an investment team that's made up of, managing directors, venture partners, principals, associates, and who all work together in kind of teams of 2 or 3, both to evaluate new investments and then partner to help those companies once we invest. Our decision process is a whole team. Everybody in the whole team weighs in. We have another team that's a super integral part of Madrona that are sort of the portfolio operating executives, talent who you know well, strategic communications and marketing, sales and biz dev, user acquisition. And so we all work closely together to try to help the portfolio. So that's kind of the fundamental team.
That's like how it's structured. And so
we have a great back office and support team too that I'd be remiss not to mention the fabric of our culture.
You have a great culture at Madrona. When you started in 2006, if you could talk to your younger self now and say, I wish I had known XYZ, is there something that stands out?
Well, I think, tying it to this sort of people, market, product, I think if you talk to anybody who's invested for any period of time, they'll all say it's about the team. And so I think you could, fall in love or pursue what seems like a great market or a great idea. But if the team is not all there, and by all there, I'm doing air quotes right now.
Yeah.
Of course, you only have a few founders and then you build out, but kind of having that initial right raw material. It's really hard to recruit people. People say they want to join startups, but then it's like, wow, there's always a million reasons not to join.
Do
you know anything about that, Sean?
Exactly. Do you have a go-to list of questions to vet people?
I don't know about go-to list. I mean, some of the things that we like to listen for, founders who have this right mix of really strong conviction, but also want to listen. And not listen because like we want people who, listen to us or whatever, but listen to a lot of people who seek out data,
who are curious
who are curious and seek out data to get to the right decision, but have really strong conviction. Any good founder that you can think of, if you can mentally through your mind, like have this vision, they've got a conviction around it, and they are going to not let anything stand in their way to achieve that. And that type of just, gut drive is so important because there's so many risks. Mm-hmm. There's so many reasons why this is going to fail.
Oh, for sure. But beyond the founders, the employees, like the types of people that you are just like, oh, we're looking for a chief product officer, and this person's only worked at, big companies.
Yep.
How do we know if they're ready for a startup?
So this is great. One of the things when I talked to Oliver Sharp, co-founder of HighSpot, on the Madrona podcast, we talked about this, and I'm going to use his quote, which is, he likes people that wear rubber gloves, not the people that wear white gloves. So I think this
or no gloves.
Or no gloves. This notion of people who really want to roll up their sleeves and work hands-on. Yeah. I think that's the key thing that you have to try to suss out. Mm-hmm. And if you mostly want to general manage or direct the troops, I think for so many reasons at a startup, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
The obvious one, there aren't other people to do it. But then the maybe less obvious ones, that those early employees, even beyond the founders, if you don't first really figure it out firsthand, you don't get the right learnings about the customer, the product, the market. Yeah. So I think that's the fundamental one.
I like the gloves part. I also have seen a couple people fail who aren't used to not having resources.
Totally.
So they're just not.
It's related, right?
They don't have that like grittiness. They're fine to work hard, but they're thinking, well, where's our PR agency? Like, or where's our marketing firm that we work with? And it's like, no, you're the everything person. You're pulling the data. You're telling the story.
Grit's a good word. Yeah. You have to be willing to put your hands on the keyboard, pick up the phone, and just do it directly.
Yeah, I love that.
But it's fun. You have to revel in making big strategic decisions that have a lot of downstream impact where you probably don't have a lot of data around it and are risky, as well as go write the copy, for the job description. You don't have, or whatever, right? So you get to do both. And I think people that relish being able to do both those and can context switch, and the fact they're doing the hands-on things, understanding the details, allows them to make the bigger calls, more effectively.
Do you always take a board seat with all of your investments?
Just about always.
When do you not?
Sometimes on a seed investment, if we're just a very small, participant. Sometimes at that really early stage, the company might not even have a board.
Mm-hmm. And how many boards are you on right now?
I'm on 11.
Okay. Holy, what? We've actually sworn on this before, but I just learned that we can't. But I'm going to keep doing it. So holy shit.
You can't blow your family rating on
it's fine.
iTunes or what?
We're way past that at this point. So you're on 11 boards. So what does that require of your time, and what makes you a good board member?
In terms of time, it's always the highest priority. And so if, there's lots of things we do, looking at new companies, taking first meetings, meeting with folks who are interested and really amazing folks who are interested in leaving their current things to join startups. We like to do all those things, but in the ruthless prioritization time, those 11 companies come first. Mm-hmm. And so whatever it is that comes up, that's what I try to pay attention to. Fortunately, there's generally don't all 11 have something that, every single day.
Right.
And there's sort of a rhythm to it around board meetings, around fundraisers, around product launches, around, whatever it is that's going on. So you'll spend more time certain weeks than other weeks. Mm-hmm. And then, just tactically try to set up a coffee if most of the companies are in town. In fact, of the 11, I think, 7 I can walk to.
Oh, that's great.
Which is nice. And one of the 7 that I can't walk to, actually, the CEO lives pretty close. And so we basically every couple of weeks we'll have a coffee on the calendar. Usually like to do early in the morning before everybody's schedules get crazy. And so then you kind of have this regular check-in to talk about stuff. So, it's like, oh, I'm going to see Christina in, 3 days. I don't have to call her right now. We'll talk about it then if it's not time sensitive. So that's a nice way to make sure you're on top of things. Mm-hmm. You don't just show up to board meetings, about, what's happened. I like to try to stay involved and engaged in what's happening. So then you can actually help in a higher bandwidth kind of way, and don't need a all this explanation and all the data. So you're already kind of up to speed. And so now it's time to decide or help on X or try to go land this, new hire or whatnot. You can sort of jump in.
Yeah. And what is the current temperature on the Seattle market?
I think the tech market continues to be super hot broadly across the country. In the public market, some of these highest growth SaaS companies and technology companies have had a little pullback in their multiples here over the last couple of weeks. And then there's an overall view of pretty highly valued in some of these cases. And it's pretty frothy in the valuations and the competitiveness for rounds for private companies. So I think everyone realizes that's not going to last forever and it's going to slow down to some degree. And as early stage investors, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's this overall, okay, it's really hot and it's not going to stay this way forever, but it's just
double down.
It just keeps staying hot.
Yeah, it does.
So
we're busier than ever. I mean, it's kind of freaky in a good way. It doesn't mean that all the that it's translating to revenue and to deals closing, because every candidate that's any good is getting multiple offers. Totally, and counter offers. So
in Seattle is, as you know and are saying, is particularly hot because you've got our big anchor tenants who continue to be, hiring
and all the engineering offices.
And all the engineering offices has been really the story, over the last 5+ years. And then the startup scene really benefits from those. These satellite engineering offices, they hire here locally and fight over local talent, but they're also bringing in talent.
Yes.
And the big companies, people kind of do their tour and now they want to go start something.
Yes.
More of the people at big companies like Microsoft didn't necessarily grow up there their whole career. They maybe worked at a startup before. And so they kind of have that DNA. And then the virtuous cycle of just multi-generational Seattle startups, where one startup, goes and, has a good exit. Take Isilon Systems. The founders were from Real Networks. Then the Isilon founders founded Cumulo and founded Igneous and so they go on and...
It'd be interesting for somebody to... Well, I think I just saw an article where they were talking about the Real Networks kind of minis that have come out of Real Networks, but just in general, an overall map of the Seattle tech ecosystem would be super cool.
It exists.
Where is it?
So,
Where do I find
it? WTA has kind of owned this project, and there's been 2 versions.
Are you on the board?
I used to be. Len Jordan is now.
Nice.
But so, there's a couple cool visualizations, and I know they're in the process of building that again. But the idea of the original one was sort of solar systems.
Okay.
And so you had, the suns were Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, Macaw Cellular, University of Washington, and then these orbital rings around them.
Yeah.
And then the most recent one, which was a number of years ago, is more of a constellations kind of theme. But it's cool. Yeah, the thing on Real is amazing. What an amazing group of people. And then there was GeekWire did that one. And then they did this one on Aquanav, which was cool also. Amazing family tree out of Aquanav. And we could go down the list, right?
Yeah,
it's cool.
Super cool. And so not to put you on the spot, because this is obviously another hot topic, but what are you and Madrona doing about the gender pay gap and also the lack of funding going to women?
Yeah. The imbalance in female board directors and female founders are 2 things that we both think about a lot. I'm interested on the gender pay gap. Clearly the data says it exists. I'd say my firsthand experience in that is that that's less of an issue, that females are getting paid well and similar, the same, better, whatever, than male counterparts. But we need more volume. And so that seems to be the thing that we spend a lot more time thinking about. On the board, at the board level, there's an organization that we support, and our partner Hope Cochran is one of the leaders around, called Onboarding Women. That's trying to cultivate cohorts of women leaders who can and are interested in joining boards, both private and ultimately public companies. We're actively across our companies looking to add independent board members. That's something we do anyway, and thinking about what the balance from a diversity standpoint, gender, age, point of view, all those things, but especially females. And on founders, we've backed a significant number of female founders. We'd love to back more. We'd love to see more.
Right.
We actively sort of, seek out and are looking to back more. And then on companies, really trying to hold our founders accountable to not just say, every startup says oh yeah, we want to build a great culture. We want to have a diverse workforce. And then there's the ones who actually build a diverse workforce.
Yes.
I'm interested in your point too, what's the key to building a diverse workforce, not saying you just want to, and actually holding accountable for number of people you interview, that if your funnel doesn't represent, the balance across diversity, then your final hires aren't going to either.
For sure.
And it's hard to, in my experience, to metric your final hires, because there's a number of things that go in it, but you can definitely metric your funnel. So that's one. And then hiring women leaders early, I think, is the biggest.
That's what I was going to say. Is
driver,
the key, the biggest driver.
The biggest key,
for sure.
And then it's also a slippery slope, that if you have a team that it's your first end number all look a certain way, whatever that way is, each additional hire that they all look like, it just becomes harder, right?
Sure.
It just becomes harder, and so really address it early, and especially in leadership. Because those leaders then can help recruit and build the right culture across the whole organization.
We share that opinion that it's got to be early, because it's also hard not only to just recruit them, but to onboard them and make them feel included in the culture. If it's like a bro culture and it's the one woman, especially for engineering teams. We've had companies call us and be like, we'll pay you double if you can find us women. And it's like, we found them, but they don't want to work there.
They won't come.
They won't come.
Right. And it's totally a virtuous cycle. Once you kind of get rolling on the culture, then it builds on itself and it becomes easier.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So I'm curious to know, I told you when we started the podcast that I called Jenny because I can just tell you that you have an amazing reputation. And in my mind, I'm not looking for the kind of skeleton in the closet, but it's more like, what do you really like at home? And I called Jenny and I said, what's one word you would use to describe him? And she said, everything, which was so sweet. I was like crying and gagging. And she just talked about what a good person you are, what a great dad you are. And it just sounds like the words are very consistent to describe you.
I'm sure that's overly kind. Thank you.
Well, what are the weaknesses? That's kind of what I want to know.
Do I pay you now or what?
Just pay me later.
Just pay you later.
What are the weaknesses? That's what I want to know.
Good question.
What are you working on to try to improve yourself?
I think that one of the things we always think about is how do you reach decisions early and as quickly as you can, and of course be right. One book that we all read last year was called Thinking in Bets. Annie Duke is a famous poker player and wrote this, and it's about how think about the right decision process and not just outcome. You can have a great process and get unlucky in the outcome, or you can have a bad process and get unlucky in the outcome. And so I think trying to push myself and the firm to do strong work on new ideas and reach a decision quickly. And by that, you make a good impression on the entrepreneur. You get in deals sooner, which is generally the earlier you get in, the better the returns ultimately are. And you're more likely to win those deals. And by sitting back and waiting and hand-wringing and not sure and let's wait and see if this gets farther traction along, then you're more likely to lose those deals. For Seattle companies to say, met with Madrona early on. They had lots of chances, and now finally things are going well, and I got lots of people knocking on my door.
An area for you for improvement is personally to try to
early decisiveness
get to the. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. I couldn't even say it,
Tim.
I couldn't even say it. Yeah.
Net it for us. Come on.
But there's two parts of it. It's early decisiveness, but having done enough work to have the data to do it. Because I think in this business you can also just be lazy and say, I don't like that one. I like this one.
Have there been any that you've taken a flyer on that you're happy you did and you pushed really hard? Or that you passed on?
Yeah. Well, one of the companies that I kick myself the most for not finding a way to having invested in is Auth0. So I had lots of conversations with John Gelsey when he was the founder then. And it's not clear we would have absolutely kind of won our way into the deal, but there was a lot more we could have done at different points in time to have had a chance to do that. Always loved the business, loved the team, and just kind of overthought it.
Do you ever survey people? I just thought of this right now, but do you ever survey why did we either lose the deal or, hey, what was your experience like with us?
So we definitely do postmortems on deals that we didn't get in or passed on that we wished we would have, or for sure if we lost. If we actively said we want to invest, we gave a term sheet and we didn't win. So we do postmortems around those, including talking to the founders afterwards and say, what could we have done differently? from after we meet with founders, if and we only invest in a super small percentage of the companies that we meet with, we do actually send a follow-up NPS survey. This is a newish thing that we've done over the last year. And literally get feedback on, was the interaction, the classic NPS, kind of would you refer somebody else, and then try to get some qualitative feedback on, was the meeting productive, useful, and try to hold ourselves accountable to that. Did we follow up in a meaningful time? So we try to do a set of things.
That's interesting. And what about as a board member?
So we, as a firm, we survey our CEOs. And then as individuals, we probably each have different styles. And I like to ask the founders I work with periodically, and then there's usually some
like,
sort of end of year. What else
Yeah.
can I do? Like, I think part of that relationship is we should try to give feedback to founders and management teams.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, look, I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but I get to see a lot of different companies that have been doing this for a while.
For sure.
Here's kind of what I'm seeing, and let's talk about it. And then I ask them the same question. It's, I'm sure there's plenty of ways it could be better in helping, but, you just try to, it's continuous improvement, right? You're trying to constantly learning, try to be better each week or each year.
And which of these companies are you most excited about right now? Are you allowed to say?
Yeah.
The favorite child. Who's the favorite child?
I'm excited about all my children. I have 2 children.
13 and 10?
13 and 10. Yeah, 7th grade and 5th grade. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of fun.
We're right in the same zone right now. Except for that when you have an extra one that's in 9th grade. A little extra.
So much fun.
Yeah.
There's a few companies that I'm excited about for sure. One that's had a real breakout last year plus is HighSpot. They're in the sales enablement space. And, I wouldn't say to your earlier question about taking a flyer on it, but, Robert and Oliver and David, the co-founders there, it wasn't a straight line to success. It took a little while. They had a product vision that's been a very steel thread through the whole experience around more beautiful, easier to use ways to share and find and search for content underpinned with machine learning. But the way they've become the leader in the sales enablement space wasn't always obvious. And it's very gratifying to see them succeed and how the culture that they've created and how fast that they're growing. So that's one that I think is
I've heard
particularly
great things about
exciting.
them. I don't know them, but I've heard great things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. And so on to your kids.
Okay.
Because also you have a meeting coming up. So I'm going to let you out of
I
here.
can't talk about the rest of my companies. Come on.
You can.
We'll talk all day.
Do you want to? You can. You don't want to look like favorite child. HighSpot. Okay.
If I had to,
you get a shout out, HighSpot.
Yeah.
We'll have you back on to talk about the other
Sounds
ones.
good.
I want to talk about your kids because I also know that you're an amazing father. Have you been deliberate about what you want to be like as a dad?
I think there's kind of 2 things in general you try to pass on to your kids. And I don't know that we're always the best at sort of being super formalized around that, but you just want them to work hard, to do their best and take personal pride in, like, I want to do my best, whatever it is. If it's like the dishes or it's, math or, something important.
Can you come to my house?
Right. So then I want them to have the self-confidence to believe in themselves and the humility to just always be humble.
Yeah.
And so I think those are really, and then love your family and your mom and
be nice.
and honestly, and be kind.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the main things, hopefully, that they'll pursue.
And I know that you are really good about prioritizing your family time and that you're home for dinner. I've been
most
told.
of the time. That's good.
Yeah, you got a good grade on that one, except for when you're traveling.
That's probably generous. Yeah.
And then you're also coaching the kids. Sporting activities and just kind of being there whenever possible because I know your job is super demanding. How do you take time for you and when are you kind of in your happy place?
I've always loved the Madrona culture, going back to when I started, that it's very collaborative. I think there's good people. And, part of that is, everyone works hard, but they try to get home and have dinner with your families or whatever, and then, work later in the night. Not uncommon, but that's sort of what we do. And you can't do it all the time. There's, board dinners and different things and certain evenings, but try to be home as much as you can. I'd say my happy place is, if it's just for me, I do still like to play basketball, and hopefully I'll be able to avoid injury for a few more years.
Don't blow out your knees like half my friends.
I do like that. I do love snowboarding and being on the mountain and outdoors, especially with my kids. That's definitely a happy place. Love to go to Idaho and love to go to northern Wisconsin. I'd say those are my happy places, especially with family.
And do you have any rituals? Are you like one of these, I get up early and I meditate, or I get up early and I work out, or?
I like to get up early and get work done.
So you work in the morning?
I work in the morning, yeah. So I like to wake up early. I think it's my most productive time before meetings. Just think clearly, have my coffee, do a bunch of work and email at home early, and then, get going and have meetings start.
Yeah. And do you have any creative outlets? Like cooking or
I like to read
music.
Yeah, I like to read. I like to read fiction. So
what are you reading right now?
I am reading Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. And it's amazing. Yeah, it's about kind of the birth of independent India, but it was a famous work of fiction. It won the Booker Award in 1981. And then the Booker Award gave the best of all the Booker winners for 40 years, and it was this book. And my thing lately is that I'll get the physical version and I'll get it on Audible.
Yeah.
And then I can listen in the car.
That's
perfect. And then at night I still like to
that's not
have a physical book. No, it's like efficient, right?
That's super efficient.
I like to read business stuff, but at some point I can't I can't read more business stuff.
Fried.
I can't read more emails. So I like to read some fiction.
Yeah. And
that's not exactly creative. But
no, it is creative because it's like letting your mind wander in a creative way. How do you stay informed? Like, what do you read? I know you don't want to read business stuff all day long.
Part of the morning ritual is read all the different,
What do you read?
I read The Information, I read Recode, I read TechCrunch, I read GeekWire, I read 451, I read lately Tom Krasa's new, is it called Mostly Cloudy? It's his Partly Cloudy.
Partly Cloudy.
He'd written for GeekWire.
That's a lot of reading.
A bunch of those.
Yeah. And what would you say ultimately fuels you? That's the name of the podcast, Tim. What fuels you?
In my professional life, I get the most joy from and sense of fulfillment from helping entrepreneurs be successful, seeing them be successful, and then making our investors successful because of that. Venture is interesting in that week in, week out, it's so hard to know if you're doing a good job because the paths of startups are so, up and down and then up again. But over the long term, it's so black and white. Like, what did you return to your investors? But you can only, I think, do that successfully over time by being someone that entrepreneurs want to work with and actually helping them. And so when entrepreneurs are successful and make a bunch of money and impact the world, like, that's just the best feeling.
I'm sure. It sounds like the dream job, and you're good at it. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Shauna. You're awesome.
Yeah, so
really
fun.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.